We've got a wonderful bunch of questions today. The main one is on the uses for whey in the 18th century. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. Here's the first question. This is Kristen Olson, and it's on that clickbait title video. She says, you've shown people who weave their own cloth to make their 18th century costumes, but how common was it for crocheting or knitting? Were there any particular patterns that were frequently used? Were certain clothing or household items only crocheted or knitted? Thanks for the wonderful videos. A really good question. And knitting particularly is something that's really, really common in the 18th century. And it's happening, it's a cottage industry, especially in England. The knitting of stockings and certain kinds of hats were kind of a regional specific thing. And it was, say, like where all the different socks for the military would come from these certain regions in England where they would knit these stockings up. So it was a major cottage industry in the 18th century. And that's happening in England. It's also happening in other parts of the world. But definitely, knitting is very, very common, mostly for stockings and for things like hats. They didn't really do things like sweaters that we know of in the 18th century. Crocheting is a different story. Crocheting is something that, at least in the European context, doesn't become popular until the 19th century. So there are probably origins of that in other places like India and China, but it doesn't really get popular in Europe until the 19th century. But there are other kinds of skills like that you'll also see showing up in the 17th and 18th century in England and North America. There's crewel work. There's other kinds of embroidery, handwork that's being done. So a lot of different skills like that. Here's a question from the Making Bread from Barm. This is Bensky TV. He says, hello, Jonathan. I have a question regarding leavening. My mother frequently makes palachenko. I hope I'm saying that right. A Croatian dish similar to the crepe. And when she makes leavened batter, she uses carbonated mineral water. I feel that it may have been very possible for people in the 18th century, perhaps in Europe, to use naturally carbonated water from carbonated springs as a method of leavening. Interesting question, and there is at least a little bit of something we can tap into from the 18th century. Here's something that I had information from before. There was a magazine of articles put together in 1790 called the American Museum. And there was an article by a Dr. Mitchell, and he's talking about leavening and all sorts of sort of household philosophy, but he has a section on leavening. And here's a little snippet of it. He says, how is the water of Saratoga Springs useful? In the same manner, the water, decomposed by the heat, goes into the fixed air, which insinuates itself into the bread and causes it to be light and spongy. So here he's describing a way of leavening bread using the carbonated water that was available at Saratoga Springs. I think, is that New York? In the New York area. So, yes, at least some folks were using something like a carbonated water to do a leavening effect. And we've also done, I think we did fritters in the past, and it calls for the use of ale or beer, and that has a leavening effect on the batter of that. So, carbonated waters definitely, at least in some small circumstances, were used as a leavening agent. Maltese Cross has a question. He says, the brewery videos have been great. Was Mead available in that day? And he says he would love to watch that. Well, Mead was available, and if you look in the brewing books for the time period, you'll find references to Mead. You'll also find references to Braggot and metheglin. Those are some of the real popular, real common mead-like beverages that were being made in the time period. Here's a question that came in on the green beans tarts. This is Darkaroo, and the question is, how did people make puff paste before refrigeration wouldn't the butter get too warm? That's a really good question. Puff paste is one of those items that you really have to have a particular temperature to be able to make it, and there are certain times of the year when you may not be able to make puff paste unless you have refrigeration. Although many kitchens in the 18th century were made on the ground floor or sometimes in the cellar of the house. And there you will have a much cooler temperature, and you'll be able to keep things like puff paste or the butter that you need to make the puff paste with at a much cooler temperature. So they had ways of dealing with that, but undoubtedly there were times when they probably just couldn't make it. Now we have a bunch of cheese making questions here. This one is from Gislertum, I think. Not sure if this question has already been asked. She said during the press that she wished the whey had been more clear and not losing the cream or the flavor. Why did this happen? Was it a characteristic of the milk or the temperature or whatever? Most of it had to do with the fact that we were trying to do the process as quick as possible for making the video. And the video still took almost all day to do because the stages took so much time. We couldn't keep the temperature exactly where we needed it to. We may not have waited quite as long as we could have for different stages. So that's why the whey wasn't quite where it really should have been in the press, although I think it still turned out just fine. Here's a question from Winking Donkey. In the 18th century, were wood coals from a constantly kept fire used for these lengthy and purposely slow heating steps, or was the pot placed over the fire? And it's an interesting question. These certain cooking processes, I mean, the cheese had it, other kinds of dishes we've done or projects that we've done in the past, like the portable soup, have this issue of how do you deal with getting things slowly up to temperature? How do you regulate them in a situation like this where you don't have, an oven or you don't have a thermostat on whatever you're cooking it with? And it is a difficult problem in the 18th century. In the cheese-making context itself, I think a lot of this had to do with you didn't make cheese in small batches. You made many gallons of, you were heating many gallons of milk at a time. And it's a little bit easier when you have a large quantity to deal with, that it heats up rather slowly, it loses its heat rather slowly, so you have a little bit more control keeping the heat. In this case, we had it over a stove, but stoves really weren't common in the 18th century. And here's a picture from Diderot's Encyclopedia of a cheese-making situation. And you can see here, they've got a very large pot to heat their milk in. And if you look, there's a crane so that you could move that pot off the fire and regulate that heat. So that's basically how they were going to deal with it in the 18th century. They're going to cook a large quantity at a time, so it'll be a little easier to regulate that heat. And here are several questions. Here's the main question. It has to do with whey. This is Kyle Suri. Says, what did they do with the whey? Does it have any nutritional value? Was it used for anything else, or did they just throw it out? And that question continued to be echoed through several different questions. Here's Recon 562001. Is the whey used for anything, or is it discarded? And Cy Brooks, would there be any use for the whey, or was it considered just a waste product? And several other folks probably chimed in on that same thing. The whey could be used for several different things. It could be used simply as a way to feed your hogs. And there were, in fact, some hogs in the 18th century that were called, whey pigs, because they were fed with whey alone. It fattens them up really rapidly and makes a particular kind of pork. So they used it for that, but they also used whey in many other ways. They would make whey butter, where they would use the whey, they would collect it, they would wait for the cream to rise on the top, they would heat it up, and they would make butter from that sort of second use of what was left over with the whey. But it tended to be not as high a quality of butter as regular butter is, a low quality butter, maybe just used at the homestead where they were making it. They also made whey curds, or what we would call ricotta cheese. And they would, again, heat up the whey, and then they would add in buttermilk or some other products to cause it to curd up, and then they would just eat those curds right away as a fresh product. And then there were many uses for whey as a medicine. And in fact, there's a 35-page treatise on using whey in medicines right there in the 18th century. So it was frequently used for people who weren't able to digest things properly, and many other treatments. They thought that whey was a treatment for many different problems. And here are two related little questions here at the end. This is Daniel Hutto. He says, don't pay too much attention to the comments. I don't want to see you burned out from seeing negative comments all day when the channel gets really popular. Number one, Daniel, thank you for your concern and care about what's going on with this. And I understand exactly what you're talking about. But also YouTube is it is one of the features of YouTube that there is communication back and forth. There's community here in the comment section, and that community includes me on this side of the camera, and the feedback that I get from the comment section. Regular folks on TV and other methods of talking to people, they do not have this, and it is one of the best parts. It is the feature of YouTube that's probably the most important one. And some people don't use the comment section. Some channels don't read them. They turn off the comments, but really they're missing the best part of YouTube. Having said that, here's a really interesting comment that I want you to chime in and help me out with. This is Lloyd Mullins. He says, since you're open to constructive criticism, I want to say that your Q&A videos are boring. So first, I want to thank Lloyd for giving us this comment. And I don't want a bunch of people ganging up on Lloyd for this comment. Everyone has criticism, and when they do that, they want the channel to be better. And he's commenting here about how can I make this channel better? I can make the channel better by making these Q&A questions or these Q&A videos better. How do I do that? How do I make this video a little better, a little less boring? That's my question for you today. And I know that you're going to have some good ideas. So please answer this one as best you can. Help me out with this. I really want to thank everyone out there for what you do on the channel, especially with, say, like answering the questions. This week's cheesemaking video had a lot of really good questions, and it had an amazing number of really good answers. Everyone chimed in there and gave answers to questions whenever possible, and there was a lot of good stuff going on in the comment section. So thank you so much for making the comment section on these videos useful, helpful. Also, I want to thank you for your support with buying products on our website. That is how this channel, it's how it's paid for. It's how I get to do these videos all the time. And, you know, it's a holiday season. A lot of people are buying gifts, and we have some amazing things on our website. So I want to thank everyone who goes to the website and purchases things that makes it so that I can keep doing this video. Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you so much for watching today.